So my name's Matt, and I'm from Houston, and it's so good to be with you. And I have had an epiphany lately. The epiphany is that I am officially old now. Maybe it's because I've got more gray hair in my beard or in my hair, or maybe it's because I found a really long hair growing off of the top of my ear, and that's strange. Or maybe it's because I have a 14-year-old that is now a freshman and is taller than me in high school. But when you're old, you do certain things. You keep a jacket in your car because you're always freezing cold. And you're always kind of looking back in time at the 90s and how great the 90s was. And so at halftime with my friends at the Super Bowl, we were all excited. We knew every word of every song of the halftime show of the Super Bowl. Because you're more nostalgic, and I find myself just kind of zooming out more on life these days as I get older. So you say things like, 25 years ago, I came on a campus in Nashville, Tennessee, Trevecca Nazarene University, and I was on campus there, and I loved college life. And just walking around just the last day has reminded me of just that campus life and loving coming to chapel and cafeteria and hanging out in the dorm late at night, spending time with friends and making lifelong friends in that season of life that's there. But when I went to Trevecca, I went feeling led by God, but at the same time, I just had this question that just lingered on my mind all the time. I would come to settings like this. I would come to the cafeteria. I'd have conversations with friends, and that question just kind of kept sitting there in my head. It was simply this: God, what in the world am I supposed to do with the rest of my life? What am I supposed to do with my life? And you see, I went to campus there, and I was the undecided major. I knew I was supposed to be there, but I hadn't declared a major. And so a year and a half in, I'd taken every single gen ed class that I could take. And I had run out. I had one PE class left to take. And so one evening, I just felt like I've got to get an answer to this question. And so there was this place on campus. It's a picnic pavilion on the edge of campus that I felt like this was like my holy space. I don't know if you have one of those places on this campus, the place where I would go and I need to just get away and think and spend time with God. And it was also the place where couples like to go and hide and make out. So if you're going to pray there, you had to kind of clap and cough as you went in so it wouldn't prevent an awkward moment. But I went into that pavilion that evening and I said, God, I'm not leaving this place. I'm not leaving this place until I get an answer to that question. What am I supposed to do with my life? So there's a familiar passage of Scripture that I want us to look at. You'll know the story. It's Mark chapter 6. Mark chapter 6, and we'll start with verse 30. And this is a story that we know. It's the feeding of the 5,000. And there are lots of stories we know about Jesus that are told. There are lots that are probably untold. And I don't think the authors of the gospel got together and said, well, you tell that story, you tell that one. But it's amazing how there's different ones told in each kind of voice there. But really, other than the passion narrative, that last week of Jesus' death, life, and resurrection, that last week, there's only two stories that I know of that are repeated in all four Gospels. And this story is one of them. So I've asked this question for years. Why was this story, why was this narrative so important? So let's lean into that thought today, starting with verse 30. This is the NIV version. The apostles gathered around Jesus and reported to him all that they had done and taught. Then, because so many people were coming and going that they did not even get a chance to eat, he said to them, "Come with me by yourself to a quiet place and get some rest." So they went away by themselves in a boat to a solitary place. But many people who saw them leaving recognized them and ran on foot from all the towns and got there ahead of them. When Jesus landed and saw a large crowd, he had compassion on them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. So he began teaching them many things. And by this time, it was late in the day, so his disciples came to him. "This is a remote place," they said, "and it's already very late. Send these people away so they can go to the surrounding countryside and villages and buy themselves something to eat." But he answered, "You give them something to eat." They said to him, "That would take more than a half a year's wages. Are we to go and spend that much on bread and give it to them to eat? How many loaves do you have?" he asked. "We'll go and see." When they found out, they said, 5 and 2 fish. Then Jesus directed them to have all the people sit down in groups on the green grass. So they sat down in groups of hundreds and fifties, taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, and looking up to heaven, he gave thanks. And he broke the loaves. He gave it to the disciples to distribute to the people. He also divided the 2 fish among them all. They all ate and were satisfied, and the disciples picked up 12 basketfuls of broken pieces of bread and fish. The number of men who had eaten were around 5,000. So a friend shared a video with me several months back of baby ducks. Have you ever seen baby ducks swimming before? It's a short little video. You've maybe seen before them swimming on the top, that things look docile. Do we have that video? There it is. On top, things look great. On the down, just watching their feet go to town there. But on the surface, cute, everything looks great there. So as I've thought about the last couple of years, this is kind of an image that comes to my mind from my life and the lives of others. On the outside, we're trying to keep things together. But underneath the surface, it's just a whirlwind of things. And as I've pastored and done ministry and life with people in the last couple of years, there's a word that just keeps popping into my mind, and it's overwhelmed. People feel overwhelmed, physically overwhelmed. I remember coming to campus as a freshman and having 13 hours of class, having 4 or 5 hours of a job, having no girlfriend, but spending time hanging out and playing games and sports with friends and feeling pretty busy. Well, by the time you get to my senior year, 17 hours, half-time job, I'm an RA, I'm playing on the golf team, and there's even more things to do, and you get busier and busier, and life just continues to accelerate. So as I listen to people, they are physically overwhelmed right now, emotionally overwhelmed, a roller coaster of emotions in this last season. I've had and led more funerals and weddings in the last 2 years than maybe any other season of life. There's grief and love and fear and worry. People are mentally overwhelmed. It seems like we're more advanced and have more comforts and easier ways to communicate, but we're more stressed and anxious than ever before. And then as I talk to friends, they feel overwhelmed, I think, by the brokenness. I feel overwhelmed by the brokenness that we see right now in our world, the hurt and the pain, the suffering and injustice in our world. When you look around and you see from a global scale countries like India that just suffer and just devastated by poverty, war-torn areas where people are just trying to survive, just trying to take care of their families. I see the hate and the division that we feel constantly in our country. We're closer to the border there in Houston, and we've sent teams down to the border to help with relief there. And every group that I've sent down there to help, every one of them comes back with tears in their eyes, and they are broken-hearted at seeing families and situations that they're there, just overwhelmed by the needs that are there. And then as a pastor, I'm seeing the inside scenes, the underneath the surface, with families that are struggling with addictions and pain and struggle that's happening behind the scenes of life. And then I see people who are trying to do all of this without Jesus in their life. So as an Enneagram 9, I oftentimes look at all of this and I feel like I'm spinning in one place. I'm kind of going in one place, not moving forward and spinning my wheels. And there's a thought that sometimes as I get overwhelmed that comes into mind. What in the world can we possibly do? What can I possibly do? And I wonder if the disciples were feeling that. We know that they had just been sent out into ministry for the first time. They'd sent out in twos and seeing all kinds of things, coming in, reporting cool things that had happened. But we also know that around the same season that John the Baptist had just been killed. He'd been beheaded. And so there's a season of grief that's happening within the disciples and Jesus. And so Jesus, I think rightfully, he says, let's get away. We need to retreat. We need some rest. We need some renewal. And can I tell you, if I've learned anything in the last couple of years, it's this. If you don't have personal, spiritual faith habits that sustain you in some of the most difficult moments of life, when the pressure comes, then it's so easy for us to break in several ways. And so Jesus says, well, they need to get away. They get into boats. And then there's this massive crowd that's looking at them and overwhelmed at the needs that are there. And so I don't blame them when they tell Jesus, hey, Jesus, we just We just need to send them away. Let them get some food somewhere else. But Jesus steps out of the boat, and I love his response. He sees the crowd, and he has compassion on them. So years ago, I read this little book by Henry Now, and I love it because it's only about 90 pages long. And in there, he identifies this Greek word that's there, splagnoizoma, that's there. And it's this word for compassion that's used. It's different than sympathy or even empathy when we hurt for people. This form of compassion that Jesus had it's like he felt the pain and the hurt of the people in his entrails. It hurt him so badly. But this is different than just the pain of hurting. It is being moved to action. So this word compassion is used. You think about the story of the prodigal son. The father sees his son, and he has compassion, and he leaves the porch, and he runs after him. The story of the Good Samaritan that sees the person on the side of the road that's hurt and bleeding and is moved to action, which reminds me of my favorite title for a book maybe. It's Get Off of Your Donkey and Help Somebody. And that's really the story. It's like move. That's what compassion does. It's not just sympathy, it's compassion. So that's what Jesus, he begins to teach and to help them. And he asks this question, asks them, he says, well, why don't you give them something to eat? And of course they draw back on that, the disciples do, and they say, well, Jesus comes back and says, well, what do you have? So several years ago, I was grocery shopping in Kroger's. It's a grocery store in Houston. And I have my earphones in, and I like to listen to sermons and music. And I'm actually listening to one of my mentors, Pastor Rick, share a story. And he's the pastor of this church, BFC. And he's sharing a story about this woman from Argentina. And I am shopping through Kroger, and I am starting to ugly cry in the middle of Kroger as I'm shopping, as I'm listening to the story. I immediately go to my car, and I text Pastor Rick, and I said, Pastor, if half this story is true, it may be the most unbelievable story that I've ever heard before. And he said, it's absolutely true. The Roddies from Argentina shared the story. He gets me connected to them, and I hear firsthand about this woman named Maria Cristina. And Maria grew up in Argentina, and she had two little girls, and she started having trouble with her eyes and went to the doctor, and the doctor says, you have a degenerative eye disease, and you are going to be losing your sight very soon. Well, Maria goes back home, and she tells her husband about what's going on, and he begins to project the future of what life will look like, having a great desire to want to succeed in life and to be successful and to have things. Maria's husband leaves her and her two girls behind, moves to Spain to try to find that success. Well, a couple months down the road, Maria now has completely lost her sight, and she is living on the streets of Buenos Aires. And she's there with her little girls, and she finds a bridge to live under, some cardboard as a bed. And she talks about how every evening she would go back, and her hands and her shoulders would hurt so badly because she was gripping on to the hands of her two little girls throughout the day, just hoping that no one would take these girls away from her. They hear about this group of people that were gathering in a park, and this group that was designated to help out kids, and they go to the park, and it's a vacation Bible school that's being sponsored by the local Church of the Nazarene. And so the kids go, they have a blast, and maybe one of the first times that Maria gets to sit down and relax and just listen to the music and listen to the sounds of her children laughing. They come the next Saturday hoping for the same thing, and suddenly it begins to rain. It just begins to pour rain, and the people begin to scatter all around. And the church just begins to run. The kids begin to run back to the church. But Maria is just right there in the rain, just stuck there, and she just begins to cry out to God, why are you so angry at me, God? Why would you take this thing away from me and my kids? As the church is scattering, there is a 15-year-old girl that looks back and sees this scene of this woman out in the rain. And she goes to church and grabs an umbrella, and she runs out into the rain. She runs up to Maria Cristina and says, what are you doing here? Why don't you go home? And Maria says, we don't have a home. And so this 15-year-old girl takes this little family and takes them into the church, introduces her to the pastor, and to the side says, Pastor, what are we going to do? And the pastor gathers the youth group up, gathers the students up, and says, we're going to put this vacation Bible school on for this little blind woman and her 2 little girls. And for the next hour, that's what they do. They sing the songs, they play the games, they spend time. And this little church falls in love with Maria Christina and her girls. And they kind of begin to adopt the girls. There is someone in the church that says, well, I have a garage, and I can clean that out, and they can live there temporarily. And someone else from the church says, well, we know someone from the government that they provide funds for someone that has disabilities. And she starts to get a little bit of money each month, Maria does. And then Maria not just falls in love with the church, but she falls in love with Jesus at the same time. And she begins to have these visions of what God's doing in her life. She's reading Acts, and she feels like, well, God's going to give me my own place, my own apartment, and I'm going to start a church there. 2 years later, the city begins to build these apartment-style rooms for people with disabilities. And Maria has her very own apartment. And as she's moving in, she's inviting all these people with disabilities to come to the new church that she's starting in her apartment. She goes to her pastor and says, oh yeah, by the way, you're pastoring that church in the apartment. He shows up on the first Sunday, and there are 40 people that are packed into this apartment. There is a church in Buenos Aires, Argentina, that now has over 400 members that started in Maria Christina's apartment. Well, it gets even better. Maria hears about this program in Cuba. There's a show in Argentina, the Murta show, that ran for a long time. And doing some research, found out she's kind of the Oprah of Argentina. And she finds out through the Murta show that there is a program in Cuba that helps those who are experience the same disease that she has. And so she begins to have this dream of not only going there to have her blindness cured or fixed, but also preaching to Fidel Castro, the then president of Cuba. And so she begins to raise money, and she actually gets onto the Murta show, tells for 5 minutes their story, and people start to donate. Murta pulls her aside and says, why are you going to Cuba? Why do you want to go? She says, I want to share Jesus with Fidel Castro. And so Murta gives her the rest of the money on the spot for the treatment. Maria Christina goes to Cuba. She begins to get the treatment. 37 days in, nothing's happening with her eyesight, and she cannot get a meeting with the president. When something happens, the nephew of Fidel Castro has a medical emergency, and he is sent to the hospital for a treatment. And guess which hospital that he gets sent to? Maria Christina's hospital. She cries out when she sees him. Fidel, he comes and visits with her, and she shares her story and says, I don't know what you believe, but I know that Jesus wants to walk with you. She had smuggled a Gideon's Bible inside of her bra, and she gives it to Fidel Castro in this moment. And I actually have a picture of Maria Christina with Fidel Castro. And you can see in his right hand the Gideon's Bible that she gave him. She heads back home and after this experience, and one day she hears a knock at the door, and it's her husband that had left. And now he is very successful. He started businesses, has his own hotel, I believe, chain, and he's got his young girlfriend with him. And begins to tell about all the things that they've seen and done and all the wealth that he has. And Maria invites them inside of the living room, forgives them, shares her faith with them. Both of them receive Christ as their Lord. They leave, but a few weeks later, her husband and his girlfriend are killed in an accident. But because they were not legally divorced, guess who inherited all of his wealth? A little blind woman by the name of Maria Christina. And she uses that money to help people with disabilities and those who are struggling, and to share Jesus with the people of Argentina. So much so, she received a humanitarian award from the president of Argentina. As you're hearing that story, and it is an unbelievable story. We've heard 2 unbelievable stories today. And the first time I heard that story, I thought, well, this is a wonderful story about a blind woman from Argentina that changed the lives of hundreds, if not thousands of people. But this is also a story about a 15-year-old girl who didn't just watch a scene or have her heart broken, but was moved to action through compassion that changed the trajectory of a family's life and invited someone into a transforming life with Jesus. So that scene, Jesus takes the bread. He blesses the bread. He breaks the bread and he gives it back to the disciples. And my favorite part of this scene is that the disciples are now at the end, they're each holding a basketful each of the leftovers that are there. I can't imagine the disciples thinking, I know what we gave him, and now are you telling me? Are you telling me? They get to experience the passing out and the sharing, and now to see the leftovers that are there. So back to that pavilion at Trevecca, on Trevecca's campus, I walked in and said, I'm not leaving this place until I hear from you, God. And I found myself on the bench with my hands open. And I just said, God, whatever you want me to say, wherever you want me to go, whatever you want me to do, I want to be a part of what you're doing in the world. And I answered a call to being a pastor in a local church, and I love the church. I love seeing what God is doing through the church. And it's been my greatest joy in life to get to serve around people and to hear their stories and to serve beside them, to see others changing the world. I love this little quote from Experiencing God, a book that I read 25 years ago. And the truth is that God can do anything he pleases through an ordinary person who is fully dedicated to him. So I've gotten to be a part of stories. And I wish I had time to tell you about my friends Paige and Jacob Zittel, who about 7 or 8 years ago were just in the chains of addiction in their life, and that led them to horrible places. But their life has been transformed by Jesus from the inside out. Now Paige is leading not 1 but 2 halfway houses in Houston, and they have dreams of starting their own, of helping people break the chains of addiction in their life and have healthy families again. This is my friend Beverly. I wish I could tell you about her today. She's one of the best preachers I know, and she works for the Dignity Freedom Network. And this is a group that, it's the next picture there, that helps folks in India, specifically women, who are in the middle of trafficking situations that are being exploited. And this group of people works on behalf of people who are living in extreme poverty. And I love their slogan. It simply says, because every life is worth fighting for. I wish I had time to tell you about my friend Fareed. Fareed grew up in Iran, and his father was a general in the military. And during the Iran-Iraq conflict there in the 80s, his family fled to the United States, fled to Houston. And during that process, even though he grew up as a devout Muslim, he began to experience Christ for the first time and asking really deep questions. Gave his heart and his life over to Jesus Christ. And he is one of the most joyous people that I have ever met. He is an engineer at BP. And if you remember Deepwater Horizon, the oil spill that happened several years ago in the Gulf, his elite team was sent into the Gulf to cap the well and to stop the oil spill from happening. He leads 14 other leaders in BP. And he has a motto in his leadership. He's training leaders to put faith first, family next, to invest in friends, and then work. He is changing a leadership culture at BP from the inside out. I wish that I could tell you, and he's one of our best youth workers at church. I wish I could tell you about my friend Morgan. She has been downtown working as a nurse in one of the largest hospitals there in the country. at the COVID unit. And so for the last 2 years, it has been a roller coaster of emotions. And she is one of the most compassionate people I know. She's been loving and caring for people in the most difficult moments of their life in this last couple of years. I wish I had time to tell you about Cruz and Jose. They live in an apartment complex in Houston. And this is an apartment complex it's full of first generation immigrants that have come from all kinds of different places. And they looked around this apartment complex and they saw these kids that were there playing. And they started a mini vacation Bible school that meets every week that's just changing an apartment complex. The manager of the apartment complex saw what they were doing and said, I want to give you an entire apartment. I'll give it to you rent-free so that you can keep doing what you're doing and loving and investing in kids. She came to me a couple weeks ago at church and said, Pastor, the Lord has provided a brand new 12-passenger van for her. Well, she transports kids to and fro church. She is just loving and transforming an apartment complex there. A few years ago, there's a song, and there's something about songs, right? They just stick in your mind. These words they're powerful. And there has been a song that's become a prayer for me. And it just hit me several years ago. It's by Hillsong. Maybe you recognize this bridge. Heal my heart and make it clean. Open up my eyes to the things unseen. Show me how to love like you have loved me. Break my heart for what breaks yours. Everything I am for your kingdom's cause. As I walk from earth into eternity. So as I look out at this crew of people here, I see so much potential for the kingdom of God. In this room, there are people that have been called to full-time ministry. In this room, there are people that are running away from a call to full-time ministry. In this room, there are people that are going to start nonprofits. There are people that are going to be nurses and engineers and teachers. But these aren't just occupations. These are opportunities to do ministry that will transform our world. So, as we wrap up today, I don't know if you want to do this with me. Their words are on the screen then again of that little course. Maybe this will be a prayer for you today as we think about what God has called us to do with what he has given us. Maybe you want to just open your hands and pray this prayer with me. Heal my heart and make it clean. Open up my eyes to the things that are unseen, God. Show me how to love like you have loved me. Jesus, break my heart for what breaks yours. Everything I am for your kingdom's cause as I walk from earth to eternity. Father, my life is yours. Wherever you want me to go, whatever you want me to do, whatever you want me to say, Lord, I want to be a part of what you're doing in this world. I pray that you would continue to use me. Use us to bring your kingdom to earth. And we pray all these things in your precious holy name. Amen. You are dismissed.